Hi, everyone. Wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to come in. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to be your host today. So my name is Phil Chatterton. I've spent about 25 years helping build industry-leading technology companies focused on support and engagement, and I run the sales and partner team at Com100. Just quick background on Com100, we help over 1,000 gaming clients deliver support and engagement to players, and our motto is to give every player a VIP experience. Our software handles millions of gaming support requests every year, and major trends are really, really important to us, and thus the reason for this webinar. Joining me today are Jonathan Michaels and Danny Milkova. Jonathan's an expert in the gaming space. He runs Michaels Strategies and is the former VP of Strategic Alliances at the American Gaming Association. Jonathan, would you mind adding some color to that intro, including where you live and what area of gaming you have the most expertise?
Sure. Thank you, Phil, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. I believe we have quite a range of folks. I know Phil is on the West Coast up in British Columbia. I'm here in the Washington, D.C. area, and Danny is in Europe, so we're covering the globe here. Jonathan Michaels, I'm the principal of Michaels Strategies. Been in the gaming industry for about 10 years. Certainly from my AGA perspective, I look at the industry with a very broad lens, specialize in the U.S. My firm does a lot of work on the public affairs side of the gaming industry. So we work with companies to help them advance innovations, introduce new products, help stem against regulatory issues, all of those good things. And I'm thrilled to be with you all today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan. So Danny is also an expert and has deep roots in the gaming space. She is CEO at Rakia Media. She's also an iGaming consultant for crypto casinos and startups. But of course, that's just what the slide says. So Danny, give us a little bit more background on yourself and where you're located, et cetera. Oh, Danny, I think you're on mute. Perfect.
Hear me now? Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, amazing. Thanks for the intro, Phil. I'm super happy to be here with you and Jonathan. I've been in the gaming industry for more than 10 years now, with focused experience in VIP management and CRM strategies, building bigger brands or helping bigger brands and operators optimize their operations, as well as assisting startup projects launch and get into the iGaming space. I've worked with platforms on the B2B side as well in the past, and in the last couple of years, I've been consulting startup casinos, crypto casinos. I've launched new brands, optimized, existing bigger brands, and yeah, that's my focus and expertise.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, just to give everybody a sense for the format for today, it's pretty simple. I'm going to introduce the topic that we have for today for cracking the self-service code in iGaming, and really why this topic is relevant in 2024. I'm going to ask about 5 sets of questions to our panelists and provide some results from our poll. The other thing is you'll see that we've actually put a poll over under the polls section, and in fact, SBC is going to make that available. So here's an example of a question that you can all start by answering. Or sorry, I guess you can jump in and take those questions one by one when you're ready. Then towards the end, we're going to make 3 bold predictions each, sort of related to self-service. And at the end, we're going to take questions. I'll do a very quick wrap up. So that should take the 45 minutes that we're going to have today. All right, I'm just going to pop past the poll here, and you guys can take the poll now, or you can hop in. Okay, so let's move to the subject at hand, which revolves around self-service. And I would say based on the past few years, for many operators, the concept of self-service, so let's talk about chatbots in specific, feels a little bit like the sirens in ancient Greece. It's got a beautiful, enticing sound to it, but they've been afraid that its allure will kind of end in shipwreck. And the fear is that players will lose that personal connection with the brand. And so as a result, many operators feel that, all or most player support and engagement should be delivered by humans. And I think challenging this trend and the data that we're seeing are some pretty big trends in 2024. I think the first really, really huge trend which is in the process of changing our entire world, is generative AI. And I think people have become much more tuned in and used to asking complex questions and getting support from generative AI. And we all know that, it's just so much buzz about it. But I think one of the things that's just at its very innate level is we're getting very used to having conversations with generative AI, some of which are iterative over time. So generative AI will remember, for example, what questions we asked it before. And so I think that our ability to connect with computers over text is really evolving. The other thing is, so I'm a father of 2 teenagers, and we have a whole new generation of TikTok watching, live streaming, DFS playing Snapchatters that are sort of bringing us into a completely new set of expectations. They want instant help. They have much lower patience to wait for anything. And that's something that maybe it hasn't fully hit, that wave hasn't fully broken over the gaming world yet, but it's about to. And so again, that's going to kind of turn the concept of engagement and service a little bit on its head. The other thing too is if you take a look at sort of modern self-service, so newer sort of chatbots and knowledge bases and things, they're proving to be much more capable than before, especially with repetitive or off-hours issues. So, the chatbots of the past have kind of been replaced by chatbots that sound much more human, reach into data they didn't have access to before. And so people are starting to sort of take a look at them in a slightly different way. The other thing, and this is kind of a combination of different trends, is that we're seeing and we're hearing from customers that VIP preferences are changing, and they're seeing the speed of assistance and efficiency of service as being a top perk, as opposed to necessarily completely depending on that human connection. And increasingly younger VIPs are placing more emphasis on immediacy. The last trend that we're seeing, I think that's really important and relevant in the space, is the ability to provide multiple layers of support. So of course, not depending just on self-service, but having sort of a proactive layer, a self-service layer, a layer which provides, the ability to interact directly with a human agent, and then a layer which provides a sort of a longer term piece like a ticketing layer. So these are the kind of forces that require a little bit of a deeper look. And what I wanted to do is kind of have a frank, honest conversation. And that's where I'm depending on Danny and Michael to kind of, let's have an honest conversation about what are some of the challenges here? Where is this headed? And just before I jump into the first question, I guess, Danny and Jonathan, is there anything you guys want to add to this kind of main subject before we really hop into it?
No, I don't think so. I think we can hop right on the questions, Phil.
Okay, perfect.
I want to just sorry, Phil. Can you hear me? Well,
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I can hear you. No problem.
I just wanted to add to one of those points that compliance and fraud detection is one big thing. And, I believe AI is also going to be a very powerful tool for automating those processes, but we can dive into that
Sure.
on.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so let's get to our first question. This question is relatively broad, so I'll let you guys attack it sort of from whichever direction you want to. So the question is, what major changes do you expect in player engagement and support in sports betting, DFS, and virtual casinos in the next 2 to 3 years? So maybe, Jonathan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think, speaking here in the U.S. and even up into Canada, because you're starting to see some new markets open up there, there aren't going to be as many new market openings where you're going to have floods of bonus offers and things like that. So certainly, I think a lot of the digital properties are going to say, how do we better engage our current base, because the growth just isn't going to be in the same manner in terms of players. So certainly, as you're thinking about how do we better engage those players, I think a lot of the tools we're going to talk about on today's webinar could be helpful. How do you better reach players? How do you give them better experiences? How do you help them when they need help? One of the areas I've spent a lot of time in is around payments, and quick withdrawals are certainly a huge desire for players. And certainly you can get your money in right away, you can play right away, but why do my withdrawals take 3 days? Certainly, I think you can use AI and chatbots and the like to provide support to those players to let them know. DraftKings actually ran an ad campaign in the U.S. around a withdrawal tracker where you can see how it is in the process. So I think that's a big thing. I do believe there will be continued growth in the space. I think there'll be new entrants, particularly around the DFS and even things like sweepstakes games. You're also seeing a huge generational shift on the land-based side in the U.S. So the American Gaming Association, where I worked at for several years, does a study on the average casino visitor. And from 2019 to 2024, the average age of a customer visiting a physical casino went from 50 years old to 42 years old, which is really tremendous in terms of how that shift has occurred and how quickly it's occurred. And I think as a result of that, younger players are going to demand a different experience in a lot of ways than their older counterparts.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, yeah, Danny, what would you like to add? Actually, you know what? Sorry, Jonathan, one follow-up question. Do you think that trend is going to continue to track? In other words, 50 to 42, do you think it's going to continue into the 30s? And I guess the other question was, in one of the poll questions that we asked, it was sort of like, what areas do you think self-service are going to be the most important? The one area, at least of the 31 responses that I saw, nobody talked about withdrawals and deposits. And I was very surprised by that, because I would see that as being really low-hanging fruit, provided you have proper authentication or KYC. So maybe that's what the hesitation is. But I would have thought that would have been a no-brainer, because if a system can reach in, check something, answer your question right away, even provide things like bonuses according to a certain algorithm, I would have thought that would have been something that people are considering. But maybe that's still a little bit like too bleeding edge for people.
Well, I think Danny hit the nail on the head in her comments a little earlier, where I think on the compliance side, there's real opportunity for this. Can you use these to help validate people once they're in the system if they haven't used their account in a while? How do you use it to increase account security more broadly? Because I think that's going to be a trend we're going to start to see from regulators. In terms of the changing demographics, it'll be interesting to see if it continues to get younger. When you look at the average sports bettor, they look a lot like me, mid-30s, white, male, college educated, high income. So I think there were two factors that really drove that change in the age growing a lot younger. One was COVID, where casinos in a lot of cases were among the first entertainment destinations that were open, and people were dying to get out of their homes. I'm sorry, it's a bad word to use. They really wanted to get out of their homes. So casinos are open, they'll go to them, and they said, I like this experience, and you've seen record revenues in the U.S. as a result. And the other is this digital gaming introduction, where if the average sports bettor is a younger audience, they might say, you know what, I want to go to the casino. I want to go watch games. I want to go play table games. I might even throw a few bucks in a slot machine. So, long term, it will be interesting to see if that trend continues, but certainly it's a good trend for the industry where it's going younger anyway. Will it continue? We'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, Danny, over to you. Again, tackle this question from whichever perspective you want to tackle it from.
Yeah, well, I believe that AI integration, it's already changing our industry. All of us, we are already adopting different tools in our operations on a day-to-day basis. And one thing that's focus for me, it's really, I believe that AI is the missing link between CRM and player support and the player experience. For example, we've worked with standard segmentation for years, and this is a whole new ball game, being able to target and understand each player's unique preferences, habits, and tying that to specific actions in real time to each and every player, which is not humanly possible in current operations or how we've done operations in the past. I think that's amazing. And, all those types of real-time suggestions for, your favorite, as a player, your favorite slot game, your, a sportsbook event that's tailored specifically to your own preferences, your own historical behaviors so far. Yeah, I mean, that's
I think it's something that we're going to come to expect sooner rather than later. Yeah, I totally agree.
And I believe in the next few years, actually, this type of personalization will bring VIP management to another level, because personalization on entry level and the all normal players, it will be just taking the game to the next level for VIP, because everyone will be getting kind of like a VIP treatment, right? Because we would know everything about those players and those preferences.
I totally agree. Yeah, and that may actually evolve the VIP experience, that there's something altogether different that VIPs are going to get, but that most players at least get that personalization, that efficient support. So one of the poll questions that we asked is which channels are most in demand for player engagement and support. So live chat, no surprise to anybody that we're still depending a lot on human agents, followed by in-app messaging and social media, and then email and phone. So it's interesting to see phone has dropped that much. It doesn't make, that doesn't surprise me that much in gaming, but I think things like in-app messaging, that makes a lot of sense. Do any of these results surprise either of you?
No. I mean, we all know the traditional methods like email, SMS, and live chat. What I'm very curious to see and what I'm seeing right now within our space is, I would call it a mini industry, which is the Telegram casinos, and having a whole different private and social dynamic around Telegram casinos.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead to our next question.
Oh,
So I'm going to let you answer our next question first. So this is, how will new communication channels affect the sports betting and online casino space? In my view, this is, again, Telegram, TikTok, Snapchat. There are a lot of kind of new channels, even Viber and some others. We get a lot of requests because we're an omni-channel platform to support a number of new channels. And I think these are some of the ones, at least, that we've heard of. So yes, Danny, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but that's a perfect kind of a response to the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I just wanted to bring into the topic Telegram casinos, as they have been on the rise, and not only player engagement through Telegram, right? Not only these type of community building features that we have, or privacy features, or this type of instant communication, but also being able to play in-app inside Telegram. I think that's a huge game changer. Especially in Europe.
Yeah, and of course, if I'm a player and I'm in a Telegram casino, I'm going to want to get my support over Telegram. So you want to keep as many things as you can sort of in that in-app messaging, that in-app experience, because you're sitting usually on a mobile device. You don't want to exit that experience, but you want to get that immediate support. And then the onus is on the operator to make sure they have access into CRM and these other things, that all of these things are integrated. Right. And then you have the ability for that agent to be able to see, okay, treat this channel like any other channel, but make sure that they have access to, let's say, their Jira knowledge base or any of the authentication stuff that they need to do, that's all connected into Telegram in the background. And the player just has no idea, that all this is happening. Okay. Jonathan, you can take this from a completely different angle. Of course, it doesn't have to do with Telegram, but yeah, how do you think new communication channels are going to affect sports betting, DFS, online casino, and I guess maybe tackle this from sort of like the North American perspective?
I think there's a natural evolution that will occur. And certainly we've all experienced chatbots and how bad they are, and they don't answer our question. And even some of like the things online about generative AI, where they don't necessarily, sorry, I'll start from the top because I think am I muted again?
No.
You guys hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. We're muting and unmuting. So I think the communication channels are naturally going to evolve. And they need to, but we've all had bad experiences with chatbots and even some generative AI where it says that strawberries are like, artificially grown or something, some of the things that have been out there online. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of folks trying new and different things. Certainly one of the areas I think there could be a lot of value in is around responsible gaming. One of the challenges that exists is, if somebody is really going overboard or showing signs of problematic behavior, how do you get them to think about that? How do you get them to slow down just a bit It's not that if somebody shows signs that they have a problem, but how do you use these tools to help people understand, hey, you have deposit limits. Hey, you could set a time limit and things like that. I also think, to Danny's point, there's going to be a broadening of the VIP experience. A number of years ago, I was sitting down with a senior marketing executive at a large strip casino, and I had a friend who was a reasonably big player who would bring $5,000 in and go through that, and they weren't getting any VIP treatment. And I mentioned that, and they said, well, we don't care about a $5,000 player. And you're just like, excuse me, what? So it's, how do you get that layer of player that may not qualify for your VIPs, but you give them an enhanced treatment so they feel like they're getting a better experience? I think that's really important. But you also have the inertia problem. And at least, in the gaming industry here in the U.S., we have a lot of that. This is the way we've always done things, so that's the way we need to do things. One of the areas, as an example of that, is around cashless at casinos. After COVID, I really thought that would accelerate. It still hasn't taken off. So how many of these things are you going to see from marketing executives and things like that saying, we need all these agents because this is the way we've always done things and this is what people expect? When you really should say, okay, what are some of the areas that we can improve on? How do we test these and see what works for different, player bases?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think, so I'll bring in the sort of technology perspective, because we're supporting so many different types of operators with different aged gamers that have different communication preferences. The onus is on technology companies that provide support to be able to unify all of those channels and then use tools like AI to scrape and give agents the best information they can, and then marry that with knowledge bases, CRM data, and put all of that together into a format that agents can actually process and understand, but that they also know how that particular client, how that player or that bettor wants to actually communicate with them. And it's not a super easy task. And then the key is, of course, to overlay things like QA and overlay things like understanding broader trends so that you as the operator can see, okay, how do you actually provide support? What sorts of support? How many agents do you need in a particular area? What are the types of questions they're answering, and how can you offload some of those questions towards self-service? But yeah, I think understanding what some of these new communication channels are is really, really important for especially the people who are providing the underlying software support, because we need to know which channels to prioritize to add over which ones maybe are less important or are going to be sort of a little bit more fly by night. One of the things that I've noticed too is, at least for a lot of my younger team members and a lot of the folks that I run into, like DFS in North America has really sort of, and sports betting have really ignited this whole sort of rush to new players in North America. And they're going to bring in all these sort of preferences that they have for the communication channels that they use, like TikTok, like Snapchat, and of course, interaction on those platforms isn't always from a support perspective, but operators can still learn a lot about what players are interested in, what sorts of games are going to be exciting for them, how they want to communicate. And all of that stuff together is something that is, Danny, to your point, is that's too much for an individual human to process all of this. So I think having that layer of AI, if it's working properly, should be able to sort of assist people to at least sort of make a bit of sense of it. Okay, and yeah, Jonathan, you touched on the regulatory side, so we're going to get to that in the next question. I love that topic. I know that's a topic that's near and dear to your heart. In terms of which social media channels the younger players prefers, I thought it was actually, I was surprised that Instagram featured so high in here. I would have said TikTok and Snapchat would have been higher. But yeah, do these results, Reddit and Discord, again, that doesn't surprise me at all. What do you, Danny, Jonathan, what do you guys think about these results?
I mean, Instagram to me is not surprising. It's one of these, I don't want to call it a quiet behemoth, but I'm always surprised at the engagement that they get. I'm not surprised to see Facebook lower. It's also interesting that I don't think X was listed on here. That seems to have faded a bit, at least here in the United States, from the town square that it once was, and providing news and disseminating it to folks. But yeah, I mean, the rest of it all makes sense. I mean, I guess WhatsApp and Telegram seem a little low to me, but the rest all looks about right.
Yeah, and I would have said too, like if we did this poll primarily focused on Asia, like WeChat and some other platforms would be much stronger here. I think 2 or 3 years, TikTok is going to go shooting up to the right, provided it's not banned in North America. I mean, that would be, obviously a little bit of a different scenario. But yeah, it shows you though how many different channels players are looking at and players are preferring.
I'm actually surprised to see Telegram not having higher numbers, as we are seeing the rise of Telegram casinos. I mean, we are still at the start of Telegram casinos, so I'm expecting to see a much bigger percentage here.
Yeah, and the way that I'm guessing people might have interpreted this question is people that are sort of like, Gen Z or Gen Alpha. And so Jonathan, to your point, like the average player, I think is like around 32 years old right now, 32 to 34. So that would make perfect sense that Telegram actually, Danny, would be quite a bit higher if we had asked the question maybe in a slightly different way. Okay, Jonathan, to the question that you were sort of partially answering before, with changing regulations and things sort of cooling off periods, advertising restrictions, standards for fairness, you pick whichever sort of category you want. Operators are sort of struggling to find balance between compliance and having sort of a smooth player experience. Maybe talk a little bit about how AI fits into this.
I think one of the challenges certainly with AI broadly is that regulators don't understand it. And when they don't understand things, they get scared of it or over-regulate. So I think the challenge you have in North America is we had this framework and we're still a very new market. Only 6 years ago could we really engage with sports betting, and a couple states have legalized online casino as a result. So you have a lot of, we'll call it version 1.0 regulations on the books. A lot of jurisdictions are looking at what does version 2.0 look like? What is the KYC experience? How do we enhance account security? How do we make sure we're protecting against problematic play? And you're also seeing a lot of public pressure around that. Certainly last year around the Super Bowl, you couldn't turn on the television without seeing some form of piece that was very critical of the industry. So the way a lot of things work here in the US and probably globally is the regulation pendulum swings one way and the other. So the pendulum probably swung a little bit far towards the self-regulation model. And in a lot of cases, the operators aren't doing enough around issues like adopting AI for responsible gaming. So in a lot of ways, the pendulum will swing back and there will be a swift regulatory backlash. You see this in other markets, Australia, UK, across Europe, where there have been a lot of restrictions put in place on the industry. And to me, that's in large part because the operators weren't being proactive about doing things like this. The other challenge is you have the lowest common denominator where people are going to look to who's doing the worst at this, not who's doing the best, and then kind of issue regulations around those types of operators. To me, it's how do you look at this and say, what are the things that I can utilize to help me, to help stem off some of the regulatory backlash on this? Because, here in the U.S., state of Massachusetts is the one state that mandates that operators pretty much say who's using what responsible gaming tools. And the biggest tool that was utilized in the state was deposit limits. 2.5% of players utilize them in Massachusetts. Is that good enough? Probably not. But are there ways you can use AI and chatbots to say, hey, Danny, I noticed you deposited $400 last month, and would you like to set a deposit limit for that amount? Certainly you might deposit less every month, but that gives you a baseline where you could do that. I think these sort of tools could be really helpful in helping to push players to utilize more of those tools.
Yeah, I totally agree. Danny, what do you think?
I tend to look and answer those questions in my mind from an operator perspective. So I believe that we would see the fastest adoption of AI, specifically in regulation, in early fraud detection, and AML and compliance checks. So on the positive side and the positive trend, I believe that those 3 points are going to be very important for operators. When you have different jurisdictions, or when you're an operator operating on 5 markets, 6, 7 markets, you will need some AI-powered system to monitor those changes in real time, keeping you up to date with all of those changes, right? Then, generative AI can be scanning all of those documents, regulatory bases, and all those industry news, and generating reports for operators. On one hand. On another, when we are talking about fraud detection, that's very critical for operators. So I believe, and we already have such tools in place. Some of the bigger operators are already using such tools in place, and they are becoming quite popular for operators. And AML checks as well. I believe that 90% of those parts of operations can be automated, very well automated.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that if a lot of operators took a look at the sort of what's under the hood for some of these technology platforms, there's just an incredible ability to take a look at player behaviors over communications, keywords. The types of responses too can vary from, mandatory cooling off period on the sort of severe end, all the way to on the very light end, providing an encouragement or bonuses to watch certain responsible gaming materials. Those things can be proactive, they can be reactive, they can be activated by agents that are having a conversation where the AI in the background says, hey, you know what? There's a few red, or yellow or orange flags here for this player. Maybe bring this up or add this resource. Those things are all available today. That's not future technology. And I think a lot of operators aren't aware of that. I think that sometimes people are a little bit worried about disturbing sort of the mud at the bottom of the water and going like, oh, okay, like, am I going to find out there's a much bigger problem here? I think at the end of the day, though, as regulators start to catch up and understand what these technologies are going to do, they're going to start to become more proactive about asking operators to do this. So I think getting ahead of it, at least understanding the technology, is a really good thing to do, because a lot of these things that we built in, which exist in other industries, other regulated industries like financial services and higher education and others that require mental health checks and strict compliance conversations around how agents are talking about things. Those are things that especially technology companies that have experience in other areas already have built into their technologies. And once operators see that, I think this is going to become sort of a new frontier in a sense for regulation, but it's something that's still very it feels like it's still very early stages for a lot of operators. Okay, so to a poll question, what challenges do operators, virtual casino sports betting, face in supporting a new generation of online players? This was kind of even across the board, meeting new player expectations, adapting to new channels. So, I think the takeaway from this is like everything, right? So, there's a lot of challenges that people are facing across the board. So I think that really comes down to, for an individual operator, how do you prioritize those challenges and sort of how do you tackle them? And then just a reminder to everybody who's listening as well, we do have poll questions over under the polls area if you guys want to go in and answer that, and we can refresh that data and take a look at that data towards the end. Or of course, we're super happy to talk about it in the Q&A as well. Okay, so Danny, I want to start with you for the next one. Oh, sorry, I realized we've got one more question. How do you get feedback from younger players on sporting space? Actually, this is kind of an interesting one. So maybe I'll ask the two of you guys this. If you want to get the pulse of what's happening with younger players, how do either you guys do this, or how have you talked to operators? How are they actually doing this?
I believe the best way is through and while you are still in conversation with the player directly. Any kind of after the chat question or forms, no one wants to do that. Like, no one wants to really give feedback.
So, do you think that affiliates might be a good opportunity as well to sort of tap into some of their knowledge and the amount of engagement and communication they have with players? I mean, that might be a possible way to sort of get this data.
100%. We as operators usually get feedback from affiliates on optimizing some things, for sure.
Yeah, Jonathan, what do you think? What do you think is the best way to sort of get a finger on the pulse instead of us sort of collectively trying to guess what younger players do or don't need, other than, of course, reading the data?
The agent feedback, I mean, I don't put a ton of value in the surveys and polls. You're probably gonna get a wide chasm of people who think you suck, or people that were like, okay, that was fine, I'll go through it. Reddit and Discord channels are pretty good if your player base is on those, where you might get some insights into what's going on there. But it's an imperfect science for sure.
Oh, you can also do polls, by the way. You can do polls and try to understand some what players like, and how they like to be contacted, or how they like to receive their offers. So that's a great way to do it.
Got it. Okay, so I realized I'm probably slipping a little bit behind here because we've had so much conversation. But Danny, I'm going to aim this one specifically at you because you're such an entrepreneur. You've launched a bunch of casinos. For smaller virtual casinos and sports betting operators, do you think self-service can cut costs and provide efficiency? Like, I guess what's your perspective on that?
I would say yes, 100%. I believe that smaller startup operations, they will have an amazing opportunity to scale their operations faster, to have more efficient processes, internal processes, and work much greater volumes with much smaller teams than what we've used so far. Traditionally, you have the number of agents proportional to the queries that are coming through. And now you can filter all the FAQs, account management, even game recommendations, all of those basic types of questions. You can filter them through your AI bot and get the actual more complicated player questions or VIP player communications to your agents. So for sure, I believe that you can reduce operational costs and resolution time as well. You can solve those queries so much faster.
So, and Jonathan, does the same thing apply to larger, sports betting operators, virtual casinos? Do you think the same thing applies? Like, there's a big opportunity for savings here, or do you think there's a trade-off?
I think it's more of a trade-off. I think it's the ability to provide better service to a wider audience. I always think of, when you're talking about customer service and support, there's a movie Office Space in the United States, and they were interviewing one of these middle managers, and he's like, but I'm a people person. And I think within a lot of the larger operators, they'll go, within that, we need to have, people persons that are talking to our VIPs and things like that. But how do you expand that? Because you can only have so many, and certainly those roles have a lot of turnover historically. How do you make sure you're providing a better experience to a larger part of your player base? And that's really where I think these types of tools are going to come in handy for the larger folks.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of an existential question in a way, because I totally understand the perspective of, hey, it's great to talk to a human and have that personal conversation. And I think a lot of us sort of cling to that. But I think the flip side is there's a whole generation of players who are coming up who are less inclined to do that. I think if you're sort of, let's say, an older millennial or a Gen X, you're super excited or happy to talk to somebody directly. But if you're a Gen Alpha or Gen Z, you're like, yeah, no, I don't really, that's a bit too personal to talk to somebody, right? It's too intimate. So I think you got to be able to sort of vary that experience. And I think it doesn't mean agents should go away by any stretch of imagination. I think it just means some of the repetitive issues, some of the things that are a little bit easier to handle should be able to be offloaded, and that should have a significant cost savings to it. So interesting. How often do you update support channels to match changing customer preferences? I thought this was interesting that it was quarterly. So that shows you in gaming, like, a lot of people are moving relatively quick compared to a lot of other industries. How confident are you in your company's ability to meet changing player support needs? People were actually pretty confident overall, which I thought was kind of a good sign. I think gaming in general is pretty open to trying new things, adopting technologies relatively quickly, but keeping that underlying layer of like live agent support so that if other things aren't as successful, that they can always sort of depend on that. So I think that's where a lot of that confidence comes from. But I don't know if you guys would agree with that assessment. All right, jumping to our last question. And this is really like, let's tear the covers off. What are the challenges? Like, why are people not adopting these technologies more? Is it sort of, the fear of losing personalization? Is it, oh my God, this is another thing I have to add to my plate, and how do I build intents and all these things that sound really confusing? Danny, maybe start with you. What do you think are like the big blockers for operators putting self-service in place?
I think the first question is setting up and training the bot in practice. How does it work? What is it? How do I do it? Training the bot. I think that's something scary for operators. How do I get all the necessary data? How do I organize it? All of those parts might seem to be critical. Personalization laws, for sure, as Jonathan mentioned before. Bad bot experiences that we've all had in the past, right?
Sure.
I mean,
100%. Yeah, especially if you look back like 5 or 6 years ago, it's like, oh my God, just get me talk to a human.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's a lot of folks saying, I have a laundry list of priorities, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Are people clamoring for me to have a better chatbot? Not necessarily. I mean, I think everyone pretty much has one, and some are good and some are decent and some are terrible, quite frankly. So when you're saying, you looked at here in the U.S., the NFL football season just started, you have new products abound across the operators. A lot of their priority is how do we get those new products out there to increase market share? And is an AI chatbot tool going to move the needle on market share for me? I don't think so. I think it's much more of a player engagement tool than a player recruitment tool. So it probably falls a little further down on the priority queue. But that being said, how do you give a better experience to players? And I think that we'll call it the omni-channel operators, the MGMs, the Caesars here in the U.S. to a lesser extent, Bet Rivers and Penn with their Bet ESPN brand. Those are the types of operators I think would benefit the most from this because they can link their land-based and their digital offerings together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. I think one of the things too that is sort of emerging are more proactive experiences that are a lot more conversational. And so I think as people come in and they take another look at these tools, they're starting to see it's actually a very different tool than it was before. And so the ability to convert new players into active players ongoing, a lot of that comes from the types of ways that you actually train these experiences into these bots and how you offer things like bonuses and how you provide information and the level of detail of the content that you add to it. And yeah, so I think that there's sort of an emerging conversation, but I totally agree with you guys. Okay, so this was the one where I thought it was so interesting. It's like, where do the self-serve options work best? It was like deposit was 0, which was really surprised me because I think this is something where I'd really like to change everyone's minds. I think this is a no-brainer. Like the ability to go in and check in deposits or even train a bot how to provide bonuses. I mean, those types of things are really, really something that's not super complicated to do. But the rest of it wasn't super, super confusing. Okay, so we're very, very short on time. I realized, we did not time this perfectly. Let's just do one bold prediction each for what the future is going to look like. And maybe Jonathan, let's start with you.
I mean, mine is the responsible gaming focus for these sort of opportunities in the U.S. This type of tool screams for it. It's how do you reach players where they are and ensure that they're gaming responsibly and enjoying themselves, and if they aren't, how do you get them the support that they need?
Yeah, absolutely. Danny? What is your bold prediction?
I believe that AI bots will be necessary and mandatory for all operations for real-time player engagement. I believe that's really the missing link between CRM and customer support for operators and for a player experience, like a personalized player experience.
I think that's fantastic. My prediction is that self-service is no longer going to be impersonal. I think that in the next year or so, when people are talking to these self-service options, they are not going to be able to tell the difference between talking to a bot and talking to a person. And I know that's quite bold, but I think that's the case. I realized, I'm sorry, you guys, I kind of messed up on the timing, so we don't have time for the Q&A. We would love to connect with you guys after the fact. I'll go in and take a look at any of the comments as well. Please come and see us at SBC Summit. So we're going to be at booth A830. Would love to see those of you who are coming to that. We'll be at G2E. We'll be at Sigma. Huge thank you to Danny and Jonathan for joining us today as well. Really, really appreciate you guys lending all of your expertise. And super big thank you to everybody who came and watched today. Really, really appreciate your time. And wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a wonderful, successful year in gaming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Phil. Bye.
Thank you.